Hello everyone, welcome to this lecture on cell membrane transport and today we are going to understand active transport. So then we are going to start with understanding what is this active transport and its two types, primary active transport and secondary active transport. Okay, and then we will understand what is the Symport and Antiport. So we have already understood the simple and facilitated diffusion in the cell membrane transport in another lecture. So then we have seen the simple diffusion. Lipid soluble molecules move through this lipid bilayer and there are some channel proteins which have river-like channels, these watery spaces all the way through the molecule, which allows free movement of selected ions or molecules, particularly the hydrated ones. Okay, and there are some carrier proteins. Okay, so the molecules or ions binds with these carrier proteins, which leads to the conformational changes, and due to these conformational changes there is movement of molecules or ions from inside to outside or from outside to inside. Okay, so these carrier proteins are of two types. First of all, this is the facilitated diffusion, okay, which doesn't requires energy, and this facilitated diffusion and simple diffusion are parts of diffusion. Then there are some carrier proteins which requires energy, and this is a part of active transport. Okay, and we know that there are two important types of channel proteins. First one is the voltage gated ion channels and second is the ligand gated ion channels. As well as we saw one very important example of facilitated diffusion, solute carrier transporters, and one important example of this SLC is the glucose transporter. Okay, so we have seen this simple diffusion and facilitated diffusion in another lecture. Today we are going to understand this part, active transport. Okay, so we also saw this in another lecture that there is movement in the passive transport or diffusion. There is movement of molecules or ions from their high concentration to lower concentration. Okay, facilitated diffusion requires carrier proteins, of course, while in active transport there is movement from lower concentration to higher concentration, and because of that they require a source of energy. Okay, so we will understand this active transport now. So what is active transport? When a cell membrane moves molecules or ions uphill against a concentration gradient or uphill against an electrical or pressure gradient. Okay, so the movement of the molecule or ion is uphill against the concentration. Okay, and it requires energy. That is why it is known as active transport. And there are two types of this active transport. First one is the primary active transport and second is secondary active transport. Both of these are differentiated on the basis of their source of energy. Okay, the primary active transport and secondary active transport, both of them uses different kind of source of energy. So active transport is uphill movement, uphill from the lower to higher concentration, from lower to higher concentration, from lower to higher concentration. Okay, and active transport is of two types. First is the primary active transport and second is the secondary active transport. Now the secondary active transport is of two types. First is Symport and second is Antiport. We will see them later. First we will concentrate on the primary active transport. So the primary active transport, as you can see, uses ATP as their source of energy. Okay, so The carrier protein, which is present in the primary active transport, uses the ATP as their source of energy for the movement of molecule or ion against the concentration gradient. Now, as you can see, the chemical composition, we can see the sodium is present in large amount in the extracellular fluid, while potassium is present in a small amount. So if we want to move the sodium from intracellular fluid to extracellular, we will need energy. If we want to move the potassium from extracellular to intracellular, we will need energy. Okay. So then we will see the primary active transport, and its very important example is the sodium potassium pump. Okay, so the sodium potassium pump pumps the sodium ions from the inside to the outside and the potassium ions from outside to inside against their concentration gradient. Okay, and this carrier protein have two subunits. First one is the alpha subunit, this one, and this is the beta subunit. Okay, so the alpha subunit have the binding sites. It have binding sites for two potassiums in the outer side and three sodiums at the inner side. Okay, as well as inner side also have ATPase activity. So when two potassium binds in the outer side and three sodium binds in the inner side, it becomes activated. It have some conformational changes which leads to the activation of ATPase activity. Okay, so when this ATPase become activated, ATP is utilized and three sodiums are kicked outside and two potassiums are kicked inside. Okay. Now, one more important example of the primary active transport is calcium pumps, which pumps the calcium ions. Okay, now the calcium ions are present in extremely low concentration in the intracellular fluid. Okay, so intracellular fluid contains very low concentration of the calcium ions. So the calcium pumps maintains this lower concentration, and these calcium pumps are present at the cell membrane, which pumps the calcium to the outside, as well as in the sarcoplasmic reticulum of the muscle cells, as well as in the mitochondria of all cells. So this cytoplasmic reticulum and the mitochondria have calcium pumps, and these calcium pumps the calcium ions inside. Okay, that's how they maintain the low concentration of calcium ions in the intracellular fluid. Now we will see one more important example of the primary active transport. It is of hydrogen ions. Okay, so it is particularly important at two places in the body. First of all, in the stomach, in the gastric glands. Okay, so there are parietal cells which have the primary active transport system of the hydrogen ions. So there it secretes hydrochloric acid in the stomach and maintain the acidity in the stomach. Okay, second is in the distal tubules and cortical collecting ducts of the kidneys. So the kidneys also have hydrogen ion pumps. Okay, so there they eliminate excess hydrogen ions from the body fluids. Okay, so the primary active transport of hydrogen ions is especially important at two places in the body. First is the stomach and second in the kidneys. In stomach, they secrete hydrochloric acid and maintain the acidity. And in kidneys, they secrete the hydrogen ions from the body and maintain the pH. Now we will see the secondary active transport. Okay, So the secondary active transport also involves the movement of ions or molecules against their concentration gradient. Okay, so they are moving from lower to higher concentration. Okay, but with that, as you can see, there are some black squares, and these black squares are secondary molecule or ion, and this secondary molecule or ion moves from higher concentration to lower concentration, higher concentration to lower concentration. And because it is moving from higher to lower concentration, they have some energy due to this concentration difference. Okay, so when this molecule, the secondary molecule, moves as per their concentration difference, they utilizes their energy, and this energy is utilized for the movement of our primary ion or molecule. Okay, so when this secondary molecule moves from higher concentration to lower concentration, and this secondary molecule have energy due to the concentration difference, and this energy is utilized for the movement of the primary molecule or ion. So this primary molecule or ion moves from lower concentration to higher concentration. Okay, you got it? So there is movement of this primary molecule or ion against its concentration gradient, and this movement is energetically driven by the transport of this secondary molecule or ion. Now, as you know that the secondary active transport is of two types. First is the symport and second is antiport. So the symport is also known as co-transport. Okay. And one important example of the symport or co-transport is the sodium glucose co-transporter. Okay, very important. Or SGLT, sodium glucose co-transporter. Now, as you know that the sodium ion concentration is higher outside, so it always wants to move inside due to the concentration difference. So when it moves from outside to inside, it have energy due to this concentration. The sodium ion pulls the glucose with itself, so the sodium and glucose, both of them move side by side towards the inside in the intracellular fluid, and this is known as symport. Okay, so both of them are moving in the same direction, so it is known as symport. Okay, so as you can see that this carrier protein have the binding site for sodium and it have binding site for the glucose. So when the sodium binds to its side and the glucose binds to its side, it is important that both of them binds to their sides. When both of them binds to their side, then conformational changes occurs, and sodium and the glucose, both of them moves inside. Okay, this is the sodium glucose co-transporter or SGLT. Now this SGLT have some very important function of transporting the glucose across intestinal epithelial cells as well as renal cells. Now in the intestinal epithelial cells, the type of SGLT which is present is the SGLT1, and in the renal cells it is SGLT2. Very important. SGLT2 have very important function of moving the glucose, transporting the glucose. Now we will see the antiport or counter transport. Now one very important example of the antiport or counter transport is the sodium calcium counter transport, or it is also known as sodium calcium exchanger. More commonly it is known as sodium calcium exchanger, or Na plus ion Ca2 plus ion exchanger, or NCX. N from the sodium, C from the calcium, E from the exchanger. So this NCX, learn this NCX, it is very important. So it have the binding site for the sodium in the outside and the calcium ion in the inside. When both of them binds to their side, the sodium, which always wants to move inside, the sodium will move inside, and with that this calcium will utilize this energy and it will move towards outside. Okay, so this is the antiport. Both of them are moving in the opposite direction. Okay, so it is the NCX. Now one important thing is there, that there is movement of 3 sodium ions. With that there is movement of 1 calcium ion. Okay, so when 3 sodium ions binds outside, 1 calcium ion binds inside, then only this happens. Okay, and it have very important role in the myocardial cells. Very important role actually. You will see it later. Why is it very important? Learn this: 3 sodium and 1 calcium. Now one another antiport is the sodium hydrogen countertransport, or known as sodium proton exchanger more commonly, or Na plus ion H plus ion exchanger, or NHE. So as you can see, there is movement of sodium ion towards inside and H plus ion towards outside, and it is present in the proximal tubules of kidney. So it also maintains the pH by maintaining the hydrogen ion concentration. However, it is not as powerful as the primary active transport of the hydrogen ion. Okay, means the primary active transport of the hydrogen ion have more role in the pH maintenance rather than this secondary active transport or antiport of sodium proton exchanger. Thank you. Do subscribe, like and share. You have an assignment. Which anti-diabetic drug acts on the SGLT2? Okay. These are the references. Thanks a lot.